Alright, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mengs, and today I welcome you guys to a massive new spotlight. In fact, this one is so huge that we were forced to split this into two videos, one for Path of Radiance and one for Radiant Dawn. Because today we are spotlighting arguably one of the most popular main characters in the entire franchise, none other than the Radiant hero, Ike.
I'm Ike, commander of the Grail Mercenaries.
Before we start this spotlight, I would like to point out one specific detail, and that is that Ike is a main character, and this means that there are a lot of details to cover about him. But in order to avoid turning this into a plot review of Path of Radiance, I will instead choose to focus on key events in Ike's story, instead of going over every single skirmish and conflict he's involved in. Let's start by having a look at his upbringing. Ike, along with his little sister Mist, was born in Gallia, land to the Beastlagoose. His father was Grail, formerly known as Gawain, one of the four riders of Dane and a renowned war hero. His mother was Elena, a priestess who used to work under King Ashnard, also known as the Mad King of Dane. Grail and Elena were fugitives on the run, as Elena had stolen a very important artifact from the king's treasury, Laren's medallion. Because of this, they were prosecuted by the Dane army and forced to hide in Gallia, where they raised their family in peace. Laren's medallion, which Elena was carrying, had the ability to magnify the chaos inside anyone touching it. In order to not go mad, its bearer needed to be in perfect harmony with their inner chaos. Anyone else, as much as coming near it, would go insane. Sadly, one day, when Ike was still a child, disaster struck as Grail touched the medallion by accident. He went on a rampage, killing countless people until he was stopped by his wife, who managed to wrest the amulet out of his hands, but not until she herself was impaled on his sword and died. Racked by guilt and grief, Grail cut the tendons in his dominant sword arm so that he could never wield a blade again, and also made a contract with the assassin Volk to kill him should he ever go berserk again. He then passed the medallion down to Mists, who had inherited her mother's ability to safely carry it. Grail then took both Ike and Mist with him to Crimea, where he founded the Grail Mercenaries. With no clear memories of his mother, as he was too young to recall the massacre at Gallia, Ike grew up in the barracks under his father's strict tutelage in Crimea, alongside his fellow mercenaries Soren, Boyd, Oscar, Riss, Gatry, Shinon, and Titania. As the youngest and most inexperienced of the mercenaries, Ike was frequently mocked and called a rookie. He also underwent grueling training with his father daily, but became stronger as a result. Many years later, when Ike was 17, news started reaching Crimea of an approaching invasion force by Dane. The Mad King Ashnard was marching his troops towards the border and showed signs of hostility, and it didn't take long before an all-out war broke out, and Dane sieged the capital of Crimea, Melior. The Grail Mercenaries originally intended to stay neutral, as they were just that, mercenaries, with no loyalties or oaths sworn to Crimea as a country, but all that changed when they accidentally rescued a woman running away from a pack of Dane soldiers. While they originally thought they had just rescued a random Crimean villager, this woman would later turn out to be Alyncia, Princess of Crimea. With Alyncia in their care, the Grail Mercenaries were forced into the conflicts, whether they wanted to or not, as they could not simply hand her back over to Dane. In order to keep the princess safe, they fled to Gallia, hoping that Dane wouldn't follow them there, as that may have been seen as an act of aggression towards the Beastlagoose. They had also hoped to request aid from Cainigus, king of Gallia. While in Gallia, something happened that would forever change Ike's life. One dark and rainy night, Ike found his father outside the Grail Mercenaries' camp, staring up at the night sky. Grail commanded Ike to go back to bed before he himself strode out into the dark Gallian forests. Ike, however, was unable to shake off a feeling of unease and decided to follow him. In a forest clearing, Ike found his father fighting against a towering man clad in black plate armor. They were fighting an intense battle, and his father seemed to be losing. When he noticed Ike, Grail ordered him to stay back. Paralyzed in fear, Ike was forced to witness the battle. He never thought his father was capable of losing to anyone, but to his shock, the armored man overpowered him and eventually impaled him with his blade. Maddened by fear and grief, Ike tried to stand up to his father's killer, but was powerless to do anything. After threatening his father about handing over something he wanted, which Ike didn't make much sense of, the armored figure was about to finish him off, but then a bestial growl suddenly loomed in the distance. Cainigus, the king of beasts, was nearby and approaching. This made the armored figure retreat, leaving Ike on the ground with his dying father. Ike attempted to carry Grail back to the base where the rest of the mercenaries held camp, but his father died before he could receive any aid. Grail's last words to Ike were to take care of his little sister and to not pursue his killer. He also said that Ike was to be the new leader of the Grail mercenaries. Everyone in the Grail mercenaries took the death of Ike's father with extreme grief and sorrow, but upon hearing that Ike was to lead them now, Gatri and Shinon abandoned the group and struck out on their own, refusing to be led by someone they dubbed inferior to them. The rest of the mercenaries remained with Ike, who sought out Cainigus to ask him for his aid in the conflict against Dane. However, Cainigus sadly informed Ike that he was unable to help, and thus Ike made the decision to leave Gallia. Escorted by a small band of Lagoos consisting of Ranulf, Leth and Mordecai, Ike set out on a journey to reclaim Crimea and to fight back against the invasion of Dane. He would encounter his father's killer, the Black Knight, at Port Toha, as the Grail mercenaries were securing a boat to Begnion, and just barely managed to escape with his life intact. Ike would eventually arrive at the city of Begnion, where he managed to secure the support of Empress Sanaki, who made him the leader of the new Crimean Liberation Army. She also imparted noble status onto him, although Ike wasn't very fond of this decision. Rather than going all the way back to Crimea, Ike decided to march his army from Begnion straight into Dane and attack the capital of Nevasa head-on, as he thought taking out King Ashnard would be a much more effective way of ending the war. The Liberation Army marched into Dane and immediately clashed with the armies there, securing victory after victory, but leaving death and destruction in their wake. Ike was pained to see the suffering that his army was causing the citizens of Dane. Hungry refugees and broken families were everywhere to be seen, fleeing from the war he had brought to their doorstep. He was tempted to stop and aid the local populace, but decided that the best thing to do was to keep marching and try to end this war as quickly as possible. Eventually, the Crimean Liberation Army reached the capital of Nevasa and laid siege to it. It was a long, grueling battle with massive casualties on each side, but eventually Ike's Liberation Army was victorious. However, King Ashnard was nowhere to be found. Upon conquering the capital, Ike learned that he was situated at Crimea Castle with a large portion of his army still intact, preparing for an invasion of Gallia. Ike immediately marched his army back towards Crimea, leaving the capital of Dane in the hands of a Begnion occupation force led by General Jared. Unbeknownst to Ike, however, this occupation force started terrorizing the citizens of Nevasa, and under their oppressive, tyrannical rule, the people of Dane suffered even more. But sadly, Ike never received news of any of this, as he was too busy marching his army towards Crimea. At the Battle of the Great Bridge, which connected the two countries, he fought and defeated General Petrine, one of Dane's 4 riders, before continuing into the heart of the occupied nation. In Crimea, Ike met up with King Cainigus of Gallia, as well as Tibarn, king of the Hulk Lagoos, both of whom had brought soldiers to bolster the Liberation Army. However, even with these new forces, taking on Dane would be a difficult task, as they were fortified and well rested in the Crimean capital. Ike's army pressed on regardless, and at the Battle of Fort Pinel, the army clashed with another one of Dane's 4 riders, the paladin Bertram. After a long and difficult battle, they defeated him, wresting from Dane one of their most important strategic points of defense in Crimea. Out of all the battles Ike fought, however, it was at Castle Naros where his most faithful showdown would take place. It was there he would be confronted with his father's killer once and for all, the Black Knights. Alongside his sister Mists, the two siblings faced off against the Dane general. Now armed with the Ragnall, the sacred blade Ike picked up from the site of his father's death, he was capable of piercing the Black Knight's armor. The two of them fought in a brutal duel to the death, but Ike eventually got the upper hand and defeated his adversary. However, as the Black Knight fell to his knees, Dane soldiers entered the hall and sprung a trap, causing the castle to start crumbling. They were hoping to bury Ike and Mist together with the fallen general. However, the two siblings got out in time just as the castle collapsed behind them, burying their father's killer beneath several tons of stone. Or so they thought. With the Black Knight fallen, only one final battle remained. At the capital of Melior in Crimea, Ike's Liberation Army arrived alongside both Begnion and Gallian forces, ready to drive out the Mad King once and for all, but he would not go down peacefully. Mounted atop a Black Dragon steed, the Mad King Ashnard and his remaining elite troops, commanded by the final rider of Dane, General Bryce, faced off against Ike and his liberation army in the castle gardens of Melior. By the end of the battle, the garden was stained with blood and littered with corpses, and in a final fateful showdown, Ike faced off against the Mad King Ashnard himself and defeated him, ending Dane's occupation of Crimea and the Mad King's War once and for all. After the battle, Elincia reclaimed the throne of Melior and resumed her role as Queen of Crimea. Ike, however, disliked his new life as a noble, as he despised the petty politics and backstabbings of the court. After a short while, he resigned his noble status, returned to his old life as a sellsword, and resumed his leadership of the Grail mercenaries.
Sorry if I'm not great at this talking stuff.
In Path of Radiance, we follow Ike on his journey from naive scared boy to responsible adult. The Ike we see at the start of the game is not the same Ike we see at the end of it, but there are 3 key points of his personality that does not change and define him as a person, and they are kindness, bravery, and acceptance. Being the son of Grail, Ike obviously tries hard to live up to his father's standards, despite often feeling it to be an impossible task, as Grail is almost this godlike hero in the eyes of many. This never stops him from trying, however, and it is probably his father's values living on inside of him that keeps him pushing ever forward, even in the face of great defeat. Perhaps one of Ike's most defining traits in Path of Radiance is his complete understanding and openness towards Laguz. In the world of Tellius, conflict between Beork and Laguz is at an all-time high, and the 2 races have extreme difficulties coexisting. The Beork think the Laguz are savage barbarians, and the Laguz think the Beork are cowardly liars. Ike, however, serves as a bridge between the 2 races, and his respect for their culture and customs earns him many friends in Gallia. In fact, one could probably make the case that Ike gets along better with Laguz than with other Beork. This most likely stems from his harsh teachings growing up under Grail, where he was taught to be strong, brave, and honest, qualities which the Beast Laguz in particular value above everything else. While Ike appears mostly humble and calm, he does reveal his warrior nature when he gets the chance to go up against very strong enemies. Although he has no love for war, his heart races at the thought of battle, and even though he has difficulties admitting it, there is little that excites him more than the prospects of an intense duel with a tough enemy. Also, growing up in a barracks surrounded by soldiers, Ike rightfully hates politics, and goes as far as to cast away his noble status in order to return to the simple life as a mercenary. He is a warrior, not a senator, and because he despises lying and treachery, he would never feel at home in a court, but more out in the woods. Ike is the only main character in a Fire Emblem game who is not of noble birth. While Ike is often thought to be Crimean, he was actually born in Gallia, and both of his parents hail from Dane. Ike's favorite foods are ribs and steaks. He also loves spicy food. Ike has an unused support with Seahark hidden in the game's files. Ike shares his English voice actor in Heroes, Greg Chun, with Ephraim, Eldigan, and Lucas. Ike was originally planned to be the main character of the scrapped game Fire Emblem 64, Maiden of Darkness. Early concept art of him exists online, though he doesn't look anywhere like he does in Path of Radiance. Being the main character of the game he is in, Ike will obviously be a very important character. However, unlike a lot of other main characters in Fire Emblem who tend to be rather subpar combat units, yes, I'm looking at Yulin and Eliwood, Ike can quickly become one of the strongest units in your army. While he is locked to swords, his high growth rates in strength and skill will quickly make him a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield, and if you're a bit lucky with his speed, it will only take him a few chapters before he reliably starts doubling enemies. While Ike may start out a bit on the frail side at first, his high hit point and defense growths will quickly make him grow into a durable frontline unit. He may start out with a base resistance of 0, but his surprisingly high resistance growth for a physical unit will quickly remedy that, so after a while he can safely start going up against mages and come out relatively unscathed. At the start of Chapter 4, Ike gets his first personal weapon, the Regal Sword. This is essentially a rapier with a different look, as it has similar stats and is effective against mounted and armored units. The Regal Sword further increases Ike's usefulness in battle, as it allows him to take down cavaliers and armor knights with relative ease, especially considering it has a 95% accuracy rate, making it very reliable. While you won't get another one, don't be afraid to use it. Its 40 uses will serve you well in training up Ike in the early game. Ike's Earth Affinity makes him a very good supporting unit, as the Earth Affinity is considered to be one of the stronger affinities in the Telly series, with its massive bonuses to avoid. Ike has many fast supports with early cast members of the game, in particular Soren and Oscar, which will really help your early game out a lot, turning Ike into a dodge tank on the front lines. At the end of Chapter 17, Ike will receive his first promotion from Ranger to Lord, but sadly he won't get anything more than an extra point of movement, so aside from unshackling his stats, the promotion won't drastically change how he works as a unit. When he reaches level 15 as a Lord, however, you get the option to give him one of the 4 occult scrolls obtained in the game to teach him one of the most powerful skills in the game, Ether, which is highly recommended. Ether is pretty much the perfect offense and perfect defense combined into one deadly package, giving Ike a percentage chance, according to his skill when he attacks, to perform 2 consecutive attacks, the first one being Sol, healing him for the damage dealt, and the second one being Luna, which halves the defense and resistance of the target. Against most ordinary enemies, Ether will kill them instantly, but against some of the game's bosses, it will prove an extremely valuable skill. It is highly recommended you get Ike to level 15 and teach him the skill before he takes on the Black Knight in Chapter 27. If you play in hard mode, this skill is almost a must if you want to outdamage Berserk Ashnard's passive healing. Towards the end of the game, Ike will obtain the Divine Blade Ragnall, and he needs the sword to damage 2 of the game's bosses, the Black Knight and Ashnard, who both wear blessed armor. When Ike gets the Ragnall in his possession, he goes from being a useful unit to a straight-out nuclear warhead. With its insane might, accuracy, and unlimited durability, this sword makes Ike capable of soloing entire maps on his own, especially considering it has the ability to attack and retaliate at range, something most swords are unable to do. Keep in mind, however, that the Ether skill will not proc unless Ike is attacking from one range, so when going up against extremely tough enemies, it might be worth not attacking from a distance. This is especially the case when fighting against the Black Knight and Ashnard, as they both have swords capable of retaliating at 2 range. There really isn't much else to say about Ike as a unit. He is very simple and straightforward. He hits things hard and can take a beating. Just make sure you feed him some kills in the early game and he will get going incredibly fast. And unlike a lot of other sword-locked lords in the series, he will actually be consistently good throughout the entire game. In Heroes, Ike is a red infantry sword unit that sports high attack, defense, and hit points, with average speed and low resistance. He has a personal weapon, the Ragnall, which has a built-in distant counter, and is also the only holder of the Heavy Blade skill. These facts alone get Ike to the top of the food chain, as he is one of the better infantry sword units thanks to his flexibility, meaning that he can fill any composition in the game, and his skill set allows him to either act as bait, be a frontline skirmisher, or simply to choke points. It's hard to screw up Ike, since his worst IV minus attack still makes him a rare skill fodder, since he's so versatile and lacking in competition, other than Ryoma. Of course, he has his flaws. He is weak to magic that can one-shot him, not allowing retaliation or vantage counterattacks. So with Bravelyn and Reinhardt running wild into the arena, Ike is severely limited in terms of usage, but he still has a lot of uses in other places. And then we come to the part of the spotlight where I review Ike as a unit. Once again, I'd like to remind everyone that these are just my subjective opinions, so do feel free to disagree with me. As the main character of the game, Ike receives more screen time and character development than the rest of the cast of Path of Radiance, but as far as main characters are concerned, I consider Ike a breath of fresh air, as he is the first and only main lord in a Fire Emblem game to not be of noble birth. Witnessing Ike growing from a scared little boy to a brave war general is a very enjoyable process, and it can be said that out of all the main characters in Fire Emblem, Ike definitely has the most growth, even though his personality isn't super complex, but this is pretty standard when it comes to main characters, as they are supposed to be relatable to the player. Ike is a simple character, but that's what he needs to be, as the story is mostly related to events that revolve around him, not how he chooses to approach them. While many could make the argument that he is a bit on the bland side because he tends to act very neutrally, I personally think he is a very solid protagonist, at least when compared to other main characters in the series. 4 out of 5 stars. Since Ike is a commoner, at least at the start of Path of Radiance, his design isn't supposed to be super fancy. He doesn't wear fine clothes, a royal cape, or a jeweled sword. He grew up in a barracks alongside soldiers, and his starting class is a ranger, not a lord. For this reason alone, Ike's design, which could maybe normally pass as a bit bland compared to some other main characters in the franchise, actually makes perfect sense for him. His iconic headband and blue hair stands out as quite memorable, and they look great together. There isn't much to comment on in terms of his appearance, because Ike isn't supposed to reflect a super fancy lord, but rather a simplistic, pragmatic main character, and for this reason alone, it doesn't negatively impact my rating of his design, but in contrast, actually helps it. 4 out of 5 stars. Ike is a very solid unit. He doesn't require many chapters to become useful, and once he gets rolling, he doesn't stop. Very rarely will you see an RNG screwed Ike, and in most cases it doesn't matter, because once he promotes and gets his hands on the Rangnail, he decimates everything inside anyway. While a lack of a mount and being locked to swords prevent him from reaching heights like that of other powerhouse characters such as Genealogist Sigurd, he's still a very strong unit in his own right, and he's easily up there alongside the best main characters in Fire Emblem. 4 out of 5 stars.
You hired me, I said I'd get to work, see, I did. Glad to give you everything I have.
Thank you for watching this Fire Emblem character spotlight. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and a comment, it really helps out the channel a lot. I would really like to once again give a big thank you to Master Annex, who provides me with a lot of important material I need for my spotlights, in particular the voice clips, which really enhance the quality of them as a whole. He has a big YouTube channel with a lot of Fire Emblem resources, in particular extended soundtracks and other cool stuff, so I really recommend you go subscribe to him if you haven't done so already. I would also like to thank my other Patreon supporters as well. Anyone of bronze tier or higher will automatically be listed at the end of my spotlights and certain other videos. I am very grateful for your continued support. Thank you so much. The beautiful artwork and design you see featured in the spotlight was made by my designer, Mina Tangerina, and my 2 script editors, Daniel and Sonagi, helped me with fine-tuning the script for this spotlight. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Min Mengs, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.